So this morning I recorded a little bit of a funny video in regards to how to mix vocals. Now of course that one was a little bit hyperbole and I didn't want to say that any of those tracks are actually bad in terms of their mixing. I just wanted to show what can happen if you don't put your vocals in the mix in the right way. And this is mainly true for spoken vocals, so something like this.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
And with these kind of vocals, it would be much more important to actually have your vocals stand out in the mix and be understandable. Of course, something like vocal chops or any other kind of glitchy effects on vocals, there it doesn't really count. But what I often hear in more beginner tracks is that they try to add cool effects on top of a vocal that is actually part of the storytelling of the track. Now actually, when it comes to this part of the track, this is a great example of a place that you technically don't really want to put in vocals because of the busyness. So as you can imagine, this part of the track is really busy, but there is a little bit of space opening up right here in the kick and bass where it becomes high-passed. The problem is that there is just a lot of different elements and there's a lot of elements with a lot of high frequencies. There's also this one element that is a little bit rumbly in the lower frequencies, and that kind of reminds me as a little bit of an actual vocal. Of course, the way that you hear it now, it is very clearly not a vocal, but when you just hear those lower frequencies, it is kind of the same rumbling that you would get from a voice. So what I first would like to do in this situation is make a little bit of space for the vocal. And the way that I'm going to do that in this case is I'm first going to remove all of the low frequencies from this area over here. So this is one of the one shots that we're going to kind of demote to more of a background sound. You can hear we no longer have that lower mid-range rumbling here. Going to do the same for this one over here. This is also lining up with our vocals. And in fact, even this one will be lining up with our vocals. So we may have to do something there as well. Let's listen to this one and see if it doesn't have too many mid-range frequencies. As you can hear, some really interesting sound design going on here. But right now what that means is that for a lot of our one-shots, they don't have a lot of high frequencies anymore here, and almost all of the mid-range is taken out as well. It is a little bit of a softer bed for our vocals to sit on. Of course, there's other elements as well, like for example these sequences here, which are going to need a lot of work. But because we have one group here, what I sometimes also like to do in these kind of situations where I just need to make space for one particular element is to do the processing on the group. I'm normally not a big fan of that because it can sometimes lead to situations where, say for example, I put a high pass here, just to make sure that there's no very low frequencies on these synths over here. It might be the case that somewhere else in the production I do want some low frequencies coming from one of my other sequences that I'm then no longer getting. Because one of the things that I don't really like to do in these situations, and this is just a little bit of a tip for those that are wondering, isn't it just okay to turn these things off and on if you're not using them? And what I would say is also there you have to be careful, because when you turn it off and on while it's playing, you can definitely generate strange artifacts like clicks. And I see this a lot with people that are filtering their kick and bass. What I like to do with my kick and bass filter is leave that in, take the phase shift that is going to cause, and then just automate it up whenever I need to do a transition. Whereas if you actually turn it off and on over here, not only are you going to have a different phase shift depending on whether the filter is going to turn on or off, meaning that at the point in time where you turn on this filter, your bassline is going to change in terms of its sound. But also because the bassline is playing there, you can cause clicks because the filter, whenever it turns on and off, needs a little bit of time to kind of warm up. And if the waveform is already at a high point or low point, what can happen is that causes a click to appear. Anyway, so what that means is that I want to keep these filters in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up like this. We'll go up. Let's make this a little bit bigger to maybe 600 Hertz like this, so that we're making a little bit of space there. And then I'm also going to do a shelf. I don't really want to cut out all of the frequencies entirely, like what we do with a filter. What I really want to do is I want to make more space towards the end here, because this is where all of the risers come in. So as you can really see, when adding an element, when really preparing the space for it, especially a big element as a vocal that really just needs to sit in there, I'm constantly thinking about all of the elements that I have in my track. And I'm constantly thinking, okay, where do I want to get a little bit of space from? How am I going to get that space? And then it's just a matter of using automation clips to kind of figure out what you want to do in terms of the frequency spectrum. For example, again, for all of our sequences, a cool trick that you can do is also automating the cue. So for example, we can go like this. Say that we do something like this. Now it has a little bit more of an opening up feeling already. I do think maybe the high frequencies can be affected a little bit more. So that's what we're going to do. We can also see that for this low pass, the very first part doesn't really have an effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up a little bit more like this, so that it starts to affect the frequencies down below here a little bit faster. And now you can hear in isolation, these synths are sounding a little bit thin towards the end. They're sounding a little bit too far in the background towards the end. But that's probably really going to work well when all of the elements are going to sit in here. For now, the vocal is turned off. So let's just listen to what we have in terms of kind of a bass for the part where the vocal is going to sit. That's already nice, but we can get a little bit more space from the risers by just going in here, taking all of these samples, and then setting them to, say, minus 5 dB here. Finally, another thing that I should probably point out is that I'm also already doing some transitioning on the drums. So I believe it's this one over here. As you can see, we have a filter kind of going down over time on top of the drums, and that is what is causing this effect of the drums also sinking back into the mix as they become less and less sharp. But then they're kind of overtaking in terms of high frequencies with these two elements here, the crashes and the snares. What might be a good idea is to also take the crashes here and turn them down a little bit in terms of high frequency. So let's set this to maybe 5K here. I'll set this back to normal for the beginning. And then I'm going to go down, say, like this. And what we should see now in terms of waveform is we can already kind of see the effects starting to happen because, of course, the kick and bass is kind of stopping here. But because during this recording session up until now, we made so much space, we should see that this becomes a little bit lower in volume. And this is always a nice check to do in order to see if there's any anomalies standing out here. So now let's see what happens if we add the vocals to this. And again, these are just unprocessed vocals. They're also going to be fairly loud. So I'm going to set these to -9.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawn, only eternal light and life.
So I would say that that's a nice bit of space for it, but the vocal definitely needs some processing, so that is what I'm going to do next. So I have a little bit of stereo width dialed in over here using M stereo spread. This is going to put the sound nicely in the sides as well.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
Now I want to keep some of the tonality of this vocal, but I do definitely want to tilt it upwards a little bit in terms of the spectrum, because what happens with vocals is that really the understandability of the vocals lies in the higher frequencies.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
So this becomes much more understandable than something like this.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
Another thing that might be interesting is to do a little bit of gating. What that is going to do is it's going to kind of take all of the background noise and put that a little bit lower in volume, which is going to be nice if we're going to do compression after this, where we're going to bring up the noise floor. So in this first M Dynamics over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the gate, and any gate plugin will be able to do this. I just really like M Dynamics because it has a really nice graph over here, and it also has fairly intuitive controls for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the size all the way down so that we really just have an actual gate where anything below the gate value is immediately cut off to minus infinity here, so to silence. You should hear this is going to become really aggressive.
In your going out, you're coming in, there is no sun, no dawn, only eternal light.
And of course that means that the threshold is set incorrectly right now. And what we want to do is we want to set the threshold in a way that we really only just capture the parts where he is actually speaking, and none of kind of the tails of that or any of the background clicks and pops that may be in there. So that is what we should be looking for here.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawn, only eternal light and life. In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawn, only eternal light and life.
And right now you hear it is still very, very aggressive. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to set an instant attack here. That is going to make it more aggressive, but we really just want it to open up instantly. And then we want to have it take a little bit of time for it to close. To say something like 200 milliseconds like this.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
And now you can hear it is slamming down immediately after he stops speaking. Now, of course, it is still very, very aggressive here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a dry wet of say 50% here, so that it's only going to remove 6 dB instead of pushing the sound down to minus infinity.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
So now that we've done that, what we can do is we can actually compress this vocal. And I often like to do this in 2 stages whenever I'm doing vocal compression. So I like to do a multiband, which I'm going to do with M Dynamics MB. And I think, 4 bands is going to be enough for this. Going to set one to the area where the sibilance is at. So that would be roughly this area over here. And I'm going to use one for kind of the upper mid-range here, maybe a little bit more like this. And then one that is just going to capture the tonality of the vocal.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life. In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset.
So this is kind of where the S is at, and this is around the area that you can really see those harmonics of the vocal coming out. And then we just have these 2 areas in between. And usually what ends up being enough with this compressor is just turning up the ratio and maybe lowering the threshold a little bit until you get a few dB of gain reduction, and then using the output over here to make up for that gain reduction a little bit again.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
So you can see over here we get -4 to -5 dB gain compensation from time to time. And in order to compensate for that, I would say you maybe would want 2 or 3 dB to go up again. because of course some parts are going to be louder and some parts are going to be quieter. And the whole point of compression is to bring those two parts closer together. So now in this frequency area, the parts of the vocal that aren't gain reduced by 5 dB are going to become a little bit louder, and those that are gain reduced by 5 dB are going to become a little bit quieter. And we're going to do the same thing for all of these.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
So now just quickly bypassing this on and off.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
You kind of notice just a little bit of a gluing effect and the vocal becoming a little bit weightier. And as the process suggests, everything just feels a little bit more squashed together. This does mean though that you're losing a little bit of the details, and especially of course the dynamic details. So if you were playing with a vocal that has a really cool feature where it becomes very quiet all of a sudden or it becomes very loud all of a sudden, compressing it like this is going to diminish that effect, of course. But in this case, because I wanted to compete with all of the other stuff in the track, I really just wanted to be loud all the way through. So the next step is another layer of compression, which I'm going to do with a full band compressor. In this case, what I really like to do is either a 76 compressor or an SSL compressor. So this is just one that I'm very familiar with, and that is why I like to use it.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
Maybe a little bit of a slower attack here.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
And essentially, again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to accomplish a gain reduction that is sometimes lower than our makeup gain and sometimes higher, so that we're kind of gluing the vocal more together. The SSL compressor is in fact very much known for its gluing effect. Often it's more used on groups and buses and stuff like that, but sometimes on vocals it is also nice. Now finally, one crucial part of the sidetrans vocal is going to be delay and reverb. And usually when I'm working on main elements, I like to use a delay like this, which is the Echo Boy Jr., because it has a little bit more texture, and specifically because you can dial in different flavors that are going to have different spectral responses. So some of them are very bright, like this transmitter over here.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
And notice how difficult it makes it to understand that part of the vocal. And you can see that the dry wet is at 40%, so you would expect the vocal to be a little bit louder than the delay, but I have a feeling that right now the delay is actually louder than the vocal, and that is because in that understandable part of the frequency spectrum, that is where this mode is very active. So for example, say something like memory, which is a little bit darker.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
You will notice that it's much clearer and that really the main vocal is a little bit more in your face. Another reason why that is because this delay has this wide feature over here, which is loaded by default. And as you can hear, the delayed part of the vocal is actually very stereo, while our dry vocal is in fact very mono.
In your going out and in your coming in.
Like it's widened, but it's not like extremely wide.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning.
And this is something that I like to do deliberately, because some of these effects make the sound a little bit wider. I like to start with a fairly mono vocal, and then I fill up the stereo field with both the delay as well as the reverb. So in terms of settings, I'm going to go with the classic 1/8 dotted. I'm going to give it a little bit more feedback, and I'm going to lower the mix a little bit. I don't like delay ducking. I just like turning the mix down enough so that the vocal is just always clear, because I don't like that sound of a delay kind of unnaturally coming up right after the vocal, which is really the same with reverb for me as well.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
One of the things that I do want to do is I want to cut this delay right on the point where we go into the next drop. And then finally a reverb to really smooth out this vocal is going to be nice. Because this is such a big sounding vocal now, one of the things that I want to do is adding a big reverb. So something like this. I'm going to keep the dry wet a little bit higher than what I would probably end up using.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and life.
So something like that in terms of a big reverb. In this case, it isn't even that long. We could probably go a little bit longer if we want to. So let's say that we do double this.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and light.
This is sounding really cool now, but you don't want to turn this up too much. One of the plugins that I often hear people talk about and which I also really like, but where you have to be really careful, is something like Black Hole, which is these really, really massive kind of reverbs. And this can really muddy up and ruin the sound and make it really incomprehensible if you use it in the wrong way.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and light.
As cool as this sounds in isolation, in a full mix this is probably not going to work.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and light.
There's this kind of constant pressure underneath it, and with this one it is probably going to be a little bit clearer.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawning, only eternal light and light.
So that's a lot nicer. The final thing that I want to do is I want to actually EQ within the context of the track, because this EQ has been applied without the actual context of the track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this EQ over here. And what we'll probably end up doing is shaping down a little bit of the mid-range here. I feel like it's still a little bit too strong.
In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawn, only eternal light and light. In your going out and in your coming in, there is no sunset, no dawn, only eternal light and light.
I like that. The final thing I want to do is I want to do a little bit of a lower volume to see if it's then a little bit more glued towards the track. Of course, anytime that you add an element, what can happen is that it can also overpower and that can kind of cloud your judgment. One of the things that I noticed is that this is a very drastic vocal when it first comes in. It really starts off strong. So we need to make sure that it doesn't start off too strong and really catch people by surprise. One of the things that we might want to explore is actually having a reverb tail into this.
And light.
I think that works pretty well, but I do want to try adding a reverse reverb into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the very first snippet of this vocal here, and we're probably going to need to copy over all of the processing up until this point to make sure that tonally at least it's going to sound very similar to what we have over here. Of course, there's still some other processing on it, and I also want to grab this EQ here, but what I don't want to grab is any of the delay and reverb that I might have on here, because we're just going to add one massive reverb. In this case, we can use Black Hole, but what I found is that oftentimes the M Turbo reverb with the square preset works really well for this. So in the huge spaces category, the square here is amazing for really just endless reverbs. It's still going. So yeah, these reverbs are massive, and what I want to do is I want to fully set it to wet and fully rely on late reflection so that we just get that wash, that tail sound. Perfect. And now I'm just going to freeze this. So now we have this long reverb tail here. Let me quickly consolidate that. So what I can do is I can make it bigger and then compensate over here. And what we can do now is line this up with the start of our vocal. So right here is where we got it from. And then reversing it, we get something that lines up like that. I do want to maybe have this line up a little bit more like this. And I'm going to probably have to lower this below the vocal quite a bit now. So as you can hear right now, it is very, very rumbly and muddy, but it's also just very, very loud. So I'm going to lower this to -20 probably is a good number. Another thing that is nice now in order to have it glued a little bit more with the vocal itself is to now take your delay and reverb from your main vocal and apply that over here. And then finally what I want to do is I want to correct that muddiness that we hear. So really that last part is the main culprit here, that lowest part. And then what we'll do is we'll see if we like the actual length of the reverse reverb that we have now. I think that sounds pretty cool. So the final thing that I'm going to do is a final volume check on the waveform by just hitting record one more time over here. And what we can see is that the waveform nicely glues together and we still hear the vocal fairly clearly. And that is exactly the effect that we're going for. So that's it. That's everything that I wanted to show in this video. I just really thought of this topic because I had scripted out that other video. And if you've ever seen any of my shorts, you probably know that I don't really like just doing the comedy part. I also like doing the teaching part. So that is why this video exists right now. So I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did by leaving a like and make sure that you're subscribed. Also make sure that you check out my sale that I'm doing over on my Gumroad and my Payhip pages if you haven't done so already. Bye bye.